Now, many influential church leaders are going to arise throughout the history that we're looking at here, roughly 1,000 years, especially in the early days. And the influence of many of these leaders still persists today, such as Augustine. Even though he existed, 1,600 years ago, Augustine's theological influence is still heavy today in Christian circles. And even outside of Christian circles, much of his work and his philosophy still has influence. So we'll look at him a little closer here in just a minute. Now, there was one well-known patriarch of Constantinople named Chrysostom, and he's widely admired in the Orthodox tradition. But he was known as the golden-mouthed orator because he had this golden preaching style, this very beautiful voice, and he simply had a wonderful rhetorical technique. But he also had the ethos to go with all of this. He was a very devout man, a deeply spiritual man who had lived as a monk for many, many decades, even living in caves and so forth and so on. So he lives this extremely simple life for a long time as a hermetic monk. But then, because of his amazing rhetorical power, winds up being the Patriarch of Constantinople, arguably the most lucrative and opulent city in the Mediterranean basin. And so you can see this is kind of a strange mix. So he becomes Patriarch in AD 398. And much of the liturgy that he had developed and so forth is still used today in some Orthodox circles by Orthodox Christians. But his asceticism, that is his embrace of a very simple, austere life, is going to clash with the Empress Eudoxia. Now, the Empress is a woman of extraordinary means and wealth. And she lives a very lavish life, and she has a lot of extremely lavish dresses, spectacular dresses, bedazzled and bedeckled with jewels and gold and so forth and so on. And so often she would enter into church very late, fashionably late, so that a lot of people would notice her and draw attention to her attire and to herself. Well, Chrysostom, being this very austere man who had lived the life of a monk, he kind of had to bite his tongue, but eventually he just couldn't anymore. And the last straw was when Eudoxia had a silver statue of herself placed right outside the church. And so eventually Chrysostom decides to unleash his rhetorical powers on such vanities and to condemn them. Well, she didn't miss what was going on, and so she had him exiled in 2 different times, and eventually he will die in exile. Fortunately, today we still have some of his works available today. About 600 of his sermons still exist today, and some of his other writings. So we can still get kind of a taste of his rhetorical prowess and so forth. Chrysostom, the golden-mouthed orator. The next guy we're going to look at, very influential, is a man named Jerome. Jerome is an amazing scholar. He kind of wandered around the Roman Empire for a while as a wandering scholar and student. But eventually he settled down, learned to read Hebrew, and became a secretary, personal secretary to the Roman bishop of Damascus in the year 382. And Damascus, seeing this young student's brilliance, gave him the task of translating the Bible into Latin. No Latin translation existed, and there was a need for such a translation. So over the next 10 or 15 years, he's going to produce this translation. It will become known as the Latin Vulgate. And it would be produced from the original languages, the best manuscripts that Jerome could find at the time. And he will become known as one of the doctors of the Western Church. Now, the Vulgate will go on to have a very, very long history and become a definitive translation for the West for well over 1,000 years. The next guy we're going to look at is a man named Ambrose of Milan. He became bishop in the year 374 in Milan, and is arguably at that time the most powerful bishop in Christendom due to the way he interacts with the Eastern Emperor. He is going to hold Theodosius responsible for some severe crimes that he committed. And the severe crime that he committed was he boxed in about 3,000 people. Some accounts say up to 7,000 people in Thessalonica in the middle of the city, and then had them all massacred. And this was due to his charioteer being killed by the Thessalonians. It was kind of a sordid affair, and you can read accounts of it, but there are various different accounts of what went wrong. But anyway, he massacred all those people as an act of revenge. And so Ambrose is going to hold him responsible for this and demand that he publicly confess his sin and repent of it. And eventually Theodosius does. And so this shows the power of the church standing up to the power of the state. And so there's some beginning to be some frictions there. Okay. But another influence of Ambrose is upon Augustine. Now again, Ambrose is this amazing orator, and he is the Bishop of Milan.